Hey listeners, welcome to the atintellect podcast. Today we have with us Shahriar, who's the co-founder and CTO of Metaview, a company on a mission to power people decisions with the truth. Shahriar is a world-class operator with the rare ability to combine deep technical expertise with a product-minded customer obsession to create dynamic products. Prior to Metaview, Shahriar helped grow the engineering team at Palantir. In this conversation, Shahriar shares Metaview's founding story, the experiences that led him and his co-founder to start Metaview. We also dwell upon how Metaview is helping organizations level up their interview intellect, and towards the end, he shares some important tips around mentorship and advice. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the show. Hey Shahriar, welcome to the atintellect podcast. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you here. I know we have been going back and forth since a very long time. I think we started this discussion in December last year or January this year, but I'm glad that you are here and we have got this opportunity to talk to you about Metaview and everything else that'll come ahead in this conversation. So a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for being patient in finding the time.
No worries. I know this conversation is going to be very, very insightful. So that's why I was very much excited to talk to you about what you've been doing since the last couple of years and your journey. I think that'll be a good place to start this. So I'll I'll briefly go through your journey, which I mostly got through your LinkedIn, and then you can break a certain pieces of it, and we can talk about it in detail. So you graduated from UCL, that is University College in London, after studying computer science, and then started your career with Morgan Stanley as a software developer. Then 2 years later, you moved to Oscar, which I believe is a fintech startup. And then Palantir happened, and after a year at Palantir, you started Metaview, which is your current uh, startup. So how was your progression like? Like, especially from an entrepreneurship standpoint, I think you were doing really well. You had a great suite of companies backing you up. So how did that seed of entrepreneurship uh, got sown? Was it at a very early stage where you were at UCL or Morgan Stanley, like something you always wanted to do? Or it happened during your Palantir days where you got inspired with something, or something stuck and you really wanted to start Metaview and move into like the entrepreneurial phase of your life?
Yeah, I think it's hard to know where the. I don't think there was any like specific moment in time where it happened. I think there's a lot of it is just the personality thing. Is like, what do I find interesting? I think ever since really my childhood, I don't know. I don't know if it's entrepreneurship, but I was always into building. Building things. Whether it was just for myself for fun, or whether it was just like fixing like a small problem in the household or something like that. So I think there's definitely like that theme that's always existed. There are definitely a set of turning points like in life, like all of which were very small ones, but then ultimately, if you like look back at them, they all lead to what ended up being Metaview. And there's loads of them, and I'll miss some of them, but like in particular, like, I remember I had a friend at university called Michael, whom introduced me to the Hacker News, for example, right? And I mean, it's just like a small event. It took about 6 seconds. But like looking back at it, that was like a pretty important turning point. Just like get familiar with ultimately what was the like Y Combinator ecosystem, etc., etc. I knew nothing about it. Or the same friend was actually the person who brought Palantir on my radar back in, must have been 2011, 2012. And that itself kind of resulted in a multi-year search for Palantir itself, and that those cohorts of companies and what they're trying to do and things like that. So I think these are just like two examples of these turning points, and I think there's many of them from like early on in childhood all the way to You mentioned Osper, like working at Osper was a turning point. Meeting Sal, my co-founder, was a turning point. There's like so many of these turning points that ultimately result in like match with that personality, or like the thing that makes you excited, which is working on something that is impactful, like building something. So I think it's a combination of all of these things, but and they're much easier to look at in hindsight, like look at backwards than like any individual moment. Some of them are very small and you don't really think of them much, but when you think back, you're like, that was quite an important moment.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a great point. So sticking on to it, just was curious personally, uh, so you were in Palantir before you started Metaview. So I'm not sure if you've heard this Jeff Bezos story, in which when he was about to start Amazon, he went to his boss at that time, David Shaw, and he pitched that Amazon idea to him. And so what David Shaw told him, that it's a great idea for somebody who doesn't have a job, right? For you're already working for a great company. I'm not sure why you want to start it. So did that question ever come across when you're talking to your friends or talking to yourself about making that move? Like, Palantir is a great company. It's very hard to get in, and you were already doing a good job there. So was there a moment of doubt or something like that, or how did that conversation really happen in your head? Like, how did you convince yourself to get started Metaview?
I think there wasn't much convincing. I think the most important thing for me was like a series of events that happened quite a few years before, which was meeting a person that you want to start a company with.
Okay.
And that was Sal. I think that's probably, at least like for me, that's like the most important part of the journey. And then from then on, the rest of it is not really, the way I looked at it is like irresponsible for us not to start a company, because of we're in a we're in a particular position of privilege where we can do this. We can do this without well, I think that when Jeff Bezos started a company, the complexion of the world was such that that was just an incredibly like scary thing to do, maybe.
Yeah.
I definitely don't see it that way right now. I
Yeah.
think it's irresponsible not to contribute to a future that you want to build. And sure, you can have a cushy job at Palantir, but if you think you're in a position to work on something more impactful, then again, our set of privileges are such that we should be working on what we think is the most impactful thing
Yeah.
in our lives. So I think the decision making is actually quite straightforward from then on. And again, I think there's like been enough education over the past number of decades, even like amongst family members and people around you, where it is people kind of just appreciate that this is a completely appropriate path for a certain cohort of people. So I think that was it. And we kind of, in our like recruiting conversations, many candidates like ask us about, how did you think about taking the risk that is starting a new company, etc. And that's really mindset. Like for us, it's not a risk.
Yeah.
It's if you are deeply passionate about a particular problem, you think you are very well positioned in the world to solve it, and you think it's impactful, then the biggest risk is not doing it, because the like opportunity cost of not doing it is just like significantly higher than the opportunity cost of not working at a great company for a few more years. So yeah, I don't know if that directly answers the question, but I think it definitely didn't feel like that big a leap. The biggest leap was the rich serendipity of meeting Sal and finding one person that you kind of have the right relationship with and trust deeply enough to start something together. And then from then on, it's just the logistics and like timing problem.
Makes sense. I think you have answered it very beautifully, because from what I can understand, like, if you have the resources, if you have the talent, and just like you had the support of your co-founder, which was really, really incredible, then it sort of becomes your duty to just do that thing, and at least try it and see if it works out or not. So
Absolutely, yeah.
the
I think the
regret.
word duty is actually, I think it is
Yeah.
a duty. I actually see it as a duty.
Yeah.
Whether to whom, I don't know. Maybe it's to oneself, maybe it's to others. It doesn't really matter. But the point is,
Yeah.
it's irresponsible not to.
Yeah. No, I think over the years, if you're able to transform recruitment, hiring across a set of organizations across the globe, and really transform their internal culture and their internal quality of talent. I think that's a good uh, like a good vision to work for, which is really great. Awesome. So let's switch our focus to MetaView now. Before we dive into the nitty gritty of it, can you, just for the audience, can you briefly explain what MetaView is in very simple terms?
Yeah, so Metaview today is a product that helps companies run amazing interviews. And we do that by helping interviewers get really good at running interviews. That is different to, we're not a product that assesses candidates at the moment. We are not in the business of assessing candidates or giving a magical like AI thumbs up, thumbs down to candidates. We very much essentially the opposite. We focus on interviewers and helping your interviewing machine as an organization become more consistent, more rigorous over time, but continuously. And we do this by recording these conversations, transcribing them, and enriching that data and pulling insights out of that data, combining it with other data that is available within an organization and giving you insights that are otherwise impossible to have. You can think of MetaView a bit like an observability or telemetry or logging tool for your interviews, in the same way that Datadog would monitor your systems and help you understand trends and fix them. MetaView will help you understand trends and fix issues within your interviewing process.
Amazing, amazing. I was really fascinated when I was doing research for this podcast and I came across this idea. I was like, first, I was very thankful that, like MetaView is working to really improve a certain aspect, which kind of has sidelined since a lot of years. Like, I'll quote some numbers just to add a bit of weight to the conversation. Again, I got these numbers from while I was doing the research. So MetaView is almost four plus years old now, right? And you guys raised nearly 7 million in pre-seed and seed rounds from incredible VC firms like Vertex Ventures, Fly Global, Village Global, Palantir as well. So I think that's very exciting. I was just curious to know, just from the back of your mind, how did you and your co-founder came up with this idea? And like, I think I would request you to go back to the very early days when you just started, and then how has the journey been up until now?
Yeah, so again, the kind of story goes way back. So the first most important part of it is maybe about a decade ago when we met, and that's like the most important part of the founding story. In fact, way back when we were working at a company called OSPA, which was focused on financial education for children, and the kind of random conversations that we would be having that would get us excited, just as not necessarily talking about the product we're working on or anything, we're just like speaking as friends. We're often like around education and like early year education for younger people and things like that. So those were some of the conversations that kind of brought us together. We then went our separate ways. Sal went to Uber to lead one of their products in Amsterdam, which is their European headquarters, and I went to Palantir. At these companies, we were both very involved in the recruiting process, and I'll speak a bit more to my experience. I got very involved in the recruitment process at Palantir because coming out of OSPER, the thing that I felt like I learned, the main lesson that I learned was that hiring decisions are the most important decisions companies make. And at the time joining Palantir, that was really just like a strong hypothesis for me. And so I tried to spend as much time in the recruiting world at Palantir, which is, there's a very unique approach to how recruiting is run at that company. And it's largely, there's some very like specific thesis and hypothesis about how to run recruiting. So I felt it was a good place to verify or falsify this hypothesis, which is hiring decisions are the most important decision. In fact, it's really the only thing that matters, because if you do that well, everything else will take care of itself. So spend a lot of time in the hiring space there. whether by just contributing as an interviewer or working on the system or the machine as a whole and trying to make it better, or contributing to making decisions on candidates, whether for my team or other people's team or the broader company. And that was really where this idea that hiring decisions are the most important decisions you make became a fact. So I think everyone really agrees with that. There's no one, it would be foolish not to agree with it, frankly. That's the truth. But the thing that I realized, and that in parallel Sile as well was realizing, was that interviews are the most outcome defining part of this process. In other words, interviews are where you learn the most about candidates. There's also where candidates learn the most about you. So the vast majority of knowledge gained about you or about the candidate is happening in these conversations. And so now you're in this world where you have the most important system in your organization, or your most important product is your hiring machine. And the most important part of this product are interviews. And that part of the product is extremely opaque. And so it is very hard to do, it's very hard to make changes to it and knowing what the outcome is, because you can't measure anything. And of course, there's a reason for that. It's because the primary artifact in these interviews are conversations. Historically, conversations have been very hard to capture. They're very unstructured. There are many good reasons why it wasn't possible to do good telemetry on interviews, essentially. But that was really the genesis for Metaview, that realization that interviews are the most outcome-defining part of the hiring process, and hiring processes are like the most important process in a company. So kind of take that, and it took a while to like gain that secret or gain that learning. Take that to one side, and then there's another factor, which is we, again, as we spoke about a bit earlier, as people in this particular position that we have been put in life, let's say, we want to spend our life on what we think is the most impactful problem that we are best positioned to solve, right? And the abstract conversation that kind of started all of this between me and Saul, and this was probably in mid 2017 maybe, and just a casual conversation, not with any specific intent to start a company, was just thinking about how can we make it such that no bad hiring decisions are ever made, or put differently, how can we make it such that everyone is doing the best work of their life at any given point in time. And that eventually resulted in thinking back at this truth, which was interviews are super important, and recognizing that is like a great wedge into the world of making sure no bad hiring decisions are ever made and making sure people are doing the best work of their life. Of course, it's like a huge problem space. You could solve it in a myriad of different ways, but you got to find your niche and like a good entry point into the problem space. And we thought, from our experiences, we thought this was a great entry point because it's something that we wanted. And that's really what ultimately became Metaview a couple of months later, when we decided the best way to verify or falsify this is to leave our jobs and just like talk to a lot of people, build something, put it in front of people, and just like iterate. And that's basically what we did. In mid 2018, we decided to give Metaview a go. We built a pretty early version of the product. We spent a whole bunch of time talking with anyone in the industry, from people in HR or recruiting, but in talking to functional leaders, VP engineering managers, software engineers, operations people, finance people, founders, anyone, and really trying to understand what are their problems when it comes to building teams, and like what is the vocabulary they use to describe these problems, and really trying to understand. We weren't trying to sell a product, we were just trying to understand the problem, to see whether this product that we thought is going to solve a problem for us, is it just us or is it for everyone? And it was very obvious that we could solve a problem for the vast majority of companies on the planet. And that's really where things got started. And then we've obviously made a lot of progress over the past 3-4 years that I'm happy to talk about. But that's where it all started. And that's really where our mission came together, which was to power people decisions with the truth. And we can later talk about the future of the company as well, but that's ultimately what we're about. We want Metaview to be the platform where someone goes to make people decisions. We think making good people decisions fundamentally is a data problem, and it's about capturing the data, certain data that's not being captured, combining that with data that's already been captured and fusing it in a way that can result in actual insights instead of just rows and rows of like raw data that is not particularly insightful. And we decided to start with a particular niche, which is making sure people are amazing at interviewing.
Makes sense. That's such a profound story. A lot of casual conversations with your co-founder just stacked up together to in the end solidify something which is now called Metaview. That's an amazing story, I think. Also, yeah.
So it is worth mentioning when when you tell these stories in kind of looking back, they do sound super smooth because the narrative is perfected.
Okay.
Of course, like when these are happening, the terrain is a lot messier. But of course, the story sounds super smooth. And it wasn't far off this smoothness, but the for people who are just trying to like start a company and they think, oh my God, all these people have such like fluid narratives. I think narratives become much more fluid as time passes because you forget the details and you're just like talking about the main events that happen. So obviously it sounds much better looking back. And it's missing a lot of the detail, but
yeah, definitely every narrative comes with its own set of challenges which kind of evaporate after some time, but still, the traces remain. And when you reflect back, it's pretty much evident how many hurdles you had to cross to reach here. Um, great. I was also, as a part of preparing for this podcast, I was listening to a couple of conversations that you and your co-founders had done previously. So what I got, like a bit of rough context from them, was that you both, although you were both involved in like tech leadership roles in Palantir and Uber, but a lot of your and your co-founders' time was being spent hiring people, because definitely like Palantir and Uber would have been at a very hyper growth stage at that point of time, and then you were actively recruiting a lot of talent. So that's when, I think you both got that realization that how critical this whole process is, and what's the need of change, and how can you both improve it with your idea. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. um Before we move onto it, you said that like your ultimate vision is to, I mean, be, from a recruitment standpoint, be the platform which companies use altogether. So although I had reserved this question for a later stage, but I think because we have hit the chord, I think I'll ask you this. As a vision to grow, do you think yourself becoming something like a Workday, which is there for, I think, medium to large organizations currently, or like Metaview is a different ball game altogether, and it's not comparing itself with any service which is out there currently?
yeah, I think obviously Workday is a phenomenal company doing phenomenal things, but we are different. I would think of Workday as a system of record. And I think the best way to think of Metaview is as a system of intelligence, where it is just a different category of software that has not really existed yet. And we and a few other companies are pioneering it. And it is where you, and I also don't think it is just about recruitment. I think it's about people decisions. And a small part of people decisions is recruiting. Maybe not a small part, maybe like a reasonable chunk of it is about recruiting, but it goes far beyond that. Whether deciding who needs to get promoted, whether it's deciding who are the best group of people to form a team. And there's a whole range of like people decisions that need to be made within an organization. And all of this requires data for good decisions to be made, and for that data to be meaningful. So there's one thing to just store the data and present it to you. increasingly in a world where there is abundance of data that is not useful. But there's another thing which to fuse all of this data together and give you actual actionable insights. And that is really what Metaview is about today, and it's also going to be about like tomorrow, which is forming intelligence so that you can make phenomenal people decisions, again, far beyond just recruiting, although that is where our focus is right now. So that's our hope. And to kind of like take one step back from it, a good way to think about it is, starting from our mission, which, as I said, it's to power people decisions with the truth, meaning we want people decisions to be just as data informed as other key business decisions that are being made today. And the word data informed is key in that. We think this is fundamentally a data problem. We think there's a whole bunch of ambient data available in the enterprise. This is data that is just like in the space, a bunch of which is not being captured. So, prior to Metaview, you would have a conversation, an interview, and then that was gone forever. There was no way to like do anything with it. There's many other bits of data like that available in the enterprise. There's a whole bunch of data that is already available in enterprise and is being captured. And to seek truth, to power people decision with the truth, for us is to fuse this data together in a way that is insightful to, ultimately a human that needs to make a judgment. And we're also not in the business of trying to make decisions for humans. People decisions are fundamentally nuanced and require human judgment, but we can give you the right kind of data at the right time with the right insight so that you can make, orders of magnitude better decisions. And that's what we want it to be. We want it to be the platform where you get the best picture of your, people ecosystem to make decisions. And yeah, so a bit, it's the next generation, which would be not just about rows of data, but it would be about intelligence derived from that data.
Makes sense. I think that's a great narrative. So I just wanted to throw some light on Metaview's current product offerings. Now, this is something which just came, like I did some research through the website and everywhere else, and this is what I could understand. I might be wrong in some areas, so feel free to correct and really dive deep into any of these areas if you want to. So what I could understand is, so Metaview's product offerings are currently have like three pillars. One is metrics, so which more or less means data and analytics to improve interviewers, like interviews insights to how they conduct interviews, reduce and eliminate bias, and then eventually build a more robust hiring process, mostly through data. The second aspect of it is like a coaching experience which directly or indirectly leads to interviewer training. The third point is shadow paths, which is more or less interview shadowing. So can you like briefly touch base on these pillars? Is there something which I didn't grab in it, which you want to really showcase more about, or things that might have changed the last few months, which I'm probably not updated about?
Yeah, so those are definitely, those are some of our products, but I think what I'll do is I'll go one level of abstraction above that, and then we'll see how these ones fit in. So the Metaview value proposition to our customers right now is around 4 pillars, and they kind of form a loop if you think about it, and I'll describe it. And it starts with onboarding, and the question that the onboarding part of our product tries to answer for our customers is, I require new interviewers, and how do I take someone who's never interviewed to prepare them and make them ready for their first interview? In other words, how do I train someone? How do I onboard someone onto the interviewing machine? And that is like the first pillar of our product. So it's all about onboarding. And so we have a set of products that try and help organizations do this onboarding. Shadow paths that you mentioned is an example of that. So we have taken a process that's historically been a very classical spreadsheet jujitsu type process, where it's like incredibly hard to manage, very hard to track, very time consuming for many humans. We have taken that and given a certain series of things that our product unlocks that we don't need to get into detail of, and we have made that entirely autonomous. So there is no Excel jiu-jitsu, it's all completely managed by Metaview. You need an order of magnitude fewer humans to get it done, and you gain an order of magnitude more speed in onboarding and a person who's never interviewed to a person who's now ready to do their first interview. So onboarding is the first pillar of our product, and with a set of things that unlocks that. Now, once you've onboarded someone, they then need to interview. And that's our second pillar of our product. It's all about interviewing. What is the set of things that Metaview can do to help your interviewers just interview, conduct the interview, have good recall, and be present in the conversation, etc., etc. So this is all around the set of products that we have around capturing the conversation smoothly and without you having to do anything, making sure that a very high quality transcript is available to you, making sure you have perfect recall, so you don't have to take notes about everything that is said and things like that. So that is the interview pillar. So that's 2 out of 4 pillars we've spoken about so far. After you have done an interview, there is then, you want to know essentially how you did, and that is the measure part of our product, which you alluded to, for example, with our metrics. So the question that tries to answer is, look, we have a bunch of interviewers that are interviewing. How are they doing as a machine, on aggregate? And so we pull a variety of different data out of interviews, from who's speaking when, to what kinds of questions are being asked, to who's, are there interruptions happening, to like what kind of things are discussed in introductions, to what kind of questions are candidates asking. A variety of different metrics and measurements that we pull out of interviews, so that we can firstly show these back to interviewers so that they get an idea of what is the data within the interviews, but more importantly, aggregating that together for leadership in organizations so that they understand essentially how consistent are they being, how rigorous are they being, and what are the trends within their organization. So measure is the third pillar. And lastly, when someone has interviewed and they've seen their data, it's kind of pointless if they can't use that data to get better. And that brings us to our fourth pillar, which is learn. And it's all about, as an interviewer, how can I learn from the interview that I just did? And that is all about our coaching and some other auxiliary products, which uses the data and the measurements that we pull out of interviews to provide hyper-contextual personalized feedback to interviewers. Feedback that is specific to you as an interviewer based on the interview you just did, and not just like it's not just generic feedback that everyone gets, it's hyper specific to you. And to give you an example of that, if I was an interviewer and I did an interview and I asked a closed question, Metaview will give me feedback on why it is usually not a good idea to ask closed questions, why you should ask open questions. It will show me an example from my interview where I asked a closed question, and it will make a suggestion on how to change that question to an open question. That's like one form of feedback we can provide amongst like hundreds of different types of feedback. And so those are the 4 pillars of our product. You onboard an interviewer, the interview, measure, learn, and then you enter a loop of interview, measure, learn, interview, measure, learn, and you constantly interview, we make measurements, and we help you learn. And so we have many different ultimately features that fall into these 4 categories. We've spoken about 3 of them here, which are metrics, coaching, and shadow paths. But that whole loop is really the value proposition to our customers. That's also how we structure and organize our product teams internally, so that our product work is directly aligned with the value prop to our customers.
Okay, I think that's an excellent deep dive into the whole setup. So I think it won't be correct to call these pillars, because then it makes them sound a bit individual. So I think it's more like interconnected bridges, or like different stations of a subway. So you go to station A and then go to station B, station C, and station D. So it's the whole interconnected loop let's
Yeah.
say, a subway framework, which sort of makes more sense here. Cool. Thanks for that. Really helps with understanding the whole structure of Metaview's product offerings. Um, moving ahead, this particular question was, when I read about it, I think it was an article on a website which focuses on uh, European startups, but it the this thing I'm very closely I'm very curious about myself. But when I saw that you guys are working on this particular aspect as well, I got like a bit more curious about Metaview and how they're uh, solving the talent problem across organizations. So um, this question is primarily focused towards how you're helping organizations to reduce and then ultimately eliminate the gender bias and inclusivity problem, which definitely remains a biggest challenge across a lot of companies, especially with regards to their hiring. I've worked with Amazon and Expedia, and those two companies are really working hard towards this as well. And I'm sure a good length and breadth of companies are also doing that. So I think with what Metaview is currently doing and what sort of data pool that they have the capability to assist uh, talent acquisition teams to really empower them with data and insight in order to what's the actionable strategy to reduce it. Um, the article mentioned that um, women candidates typically get 12% less speaking time than men candidates on average, which is something I learned for the first time. And I think that was something Metaview's intelligence really showed in in I think a survey or something. So just want to touch base on a couple of anecdotes, if you could share, or some actionable steps which you are helping your clients and organizations take to really solve for this problem, which has been continuing since a very long time, I guess. If you're able to share some of the anecdotes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's worth, so this is quite a complex topic, and Metaview is not going to solve your diversity problems. Metaview can only contribute in, ultimately you need to want to solve it. And I like that's like quite an important distinction between, you can't just like ship a product and expect to solve what are really nuanced like human issues. And the best way to describe this is, again, a product like Datadog, which is the observability for systems, for products, um, that is never going to like solve your problems. What it is going to do is going to monitor your systems and let you know that what trends are, let you know what, have essentially some sort of alerting, um, and show you where there might be problems. And ultimately, you need to have the desire as an organization to work hard and like make hard decisions to want to solve that, whatever problem it is that your system is telling you. And so that is what Metaview does. Now, without a product like Metaview, you will never know you had a problem, because it is impossible to know that your male interviewers are treating female candidates differently. That is literally impossible to know unless you have a product like Metaview. And so you do need that in place. Like a world-class modern organization will have to have an interviewing intelligence platform to be able to even know what are happening in these interviews. And this example is really like an obvious example. There are many other areas that you might find divergence from what you would hope you're achieving as well, that you will only know if you have a product like Metaview. And ultimately, a lot of these also goes back to the basics of, as an organization or as a TA leader or as a CEO, do we know what we're looking for in candidates? And really taking the hard, like these are hard questions, because you need to really be reflective on what are we looking for? What are the attributes we care about? What are the set of questions that we think will give us the most amount of signal on these attributes that we care about for this particular role? And before you interview someone or before you start hiring, you really need to answer these questions. There's a good book on this called Who, um, WHO, and maybe the name of the book might be a little different, but it's Who. And that like essentially talks about what is all the prep that you need to do before you even start hiring. And that's critical in ensuring consistency, which is ultimately what's important in making sure you're treating everyone in the same way. You want to be consistent. Once you have done all of that hard work, the only way to know whether it's actually working and it's being effective is if you're have intelligence on top of these conversations. And then product like ours not only show you the trends and the analytics and the aggregate level data, but we also, of course, through our coaching product, help every person take a step towards being more consistent and help them running like more equitable interviews by giving them nudges and feedback and things like that. And this is not about at all a big brother tool. This is about helping everyone be the best version of themselves by giving them insightful, productive, actionable feedback, both on things that they're doing amazing at and things that they need to improve on. And if there's an instance where someone can improve on ensuring different cohorts of candidates, whether it's the cohort is divided by gender or not, doesn't matter. If it's about ensuring an interviewer is treating different cohorts of candidates the same, then our product will, in a productive way, give that nudge to make sure that person becomes more consistent. If someone is already really good at that, then our product will ensure to like reinforce that so that that person doesn't diverge from what is ultimately like a really good methodology to have. So that's a little about interview intelligence, let's say, and similar to any other form of intelligence, our product will sharpen your knife, but ultimately you need to decide what you want to cut with your knife. And if you are a serious organization who wants to last, you will have to work hard in making sure you have a diverse team. And again, gender diversity is just one part of it. There's many other forms of diversity that are important. And we will definitely sharpen your knife, but you need to decide that's the thing that you want to cut with. And of course, many of the, if not all of the customers that we work with, these are world-class companies that know to win, they would have to do that. So that's how our product ends up being a must-have for them.
Makes sense. So what I gather is, I mean, Metaview essentially won't directly solve this problem, but it can empower teams. It can empower the leaders who are actually making that decision to really think about things and, using data to technically lower that gap. So they are providing the capabilities, but eventually it's like a human problem would have a human solution sort of thing, right?
Pretty much, yes. We can show you the truth, and then you can decide that is not you don't want that to be the truth, so you're gonna have to change it at some point, and we can then show you whether that is changing or not. But it will be foolish to think a bit of code can solve what is a very nuanced human problem, which is like diversity, and we would not want to do that. But we want to empower you to be extremely data informed so that you can make good judgment and see the effect of that judgment. And even if the judgment goes in the wrong direction, and if you actually make your diversity worse, that is still a much better place to be than being blind to it, because at least now okay, whatever we just did now was not effective. We know that because we're seeing the data. Cool, change of plan. We'll try something else, and eventually you'll solve that problem. But obviously, in the pre-Metaview world, it's like completely opaque. You basically have no clue what you're doing.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Great. This section, I really reserved it for a few quick, fun, very light-hearted, rapid-fire questions. So I'll ask you a couple of questions, and you just have to answer it in a couple of words or sentences. Yeah, let's have some fun. We have talked a lot about the serious topics, but now it's time to have some fun. What's one question that you always ask when you're interviewing someone?
I think there are many questions I always ask, but one of them would be, okay, these are meant to be quick answers. Anyway, I'll give you a good answer. So
Yeah.
one of the things one of the attributes I personally really care about is the level, the degree to which someone has a growth mindset. I think one of the proxies for having a growth mindset is self-awareness. I think one of the questions that I almost always ask, that gives you like a good view into someone's self-awareness. And in fact, I've stolen this question from a friend of mine at Palantir, is who's someone who has a negative opinion of you? And just trying to there are certain people who can answer that question and there are certain people who can't. And then once a person has recognized someone has a negative opinion on them, then you can have a pretty interesting discussion into why and whether that negative opinion is reciprocated and things like that. And you really get into how self-aware someone is, which I find is usually like a good proxy for how much of growth mindset they have. But that's something I almost always ask.
That's a very interesting question. Yeah, can definitely open up a lot of avenues for the person to answer and can really show great detail about how self-aware they are. Pretty good. The third one is, what's the best and worst advice that you have received as an entrepreneur?
This is quite hard. I think one of the best advice, maybe it's the best advice, I don't know. It's obviously not one I've directly received. The world has received from Paul Graham, which is do things that don't scale.
Yeah.
I think it is nuanced and it's up for interpretation, but however implicit way I've interpreted it in my head has been one of the most useful mental models for me, at least as a person, and really therefore for Metaview as a company. So I would say that's the best advice for the sake of this conversation. And the worst is difficult. I think most advice is very good in isolation, and they are almost all very terrible once you realize that you're lacking all the context necessary to give good advice for someone's particular scenario. So I don't know if what's worst advice, but I think most advice is like good enough.
By worst advice, I mean like something which you thought, let's say at an early stage, could really impact the journey or could have been difficult, but eventually played out pretty well. Like sort of, there's a lot of overthinking when people start companies, right? Like, will this happen? Will this not happen? Will I able to raise money and stuff like that? So did something that was actually seeming like a mountain earlier, but then it eventually turned out to be a rock, something like that.
I don't think I have a good answer to that. Yeah, I think I have a good answer. I think most advice is good advice, and then you can apply your own context to it, and it ends up not being very helpful. But every now and again, there's like good nuggets. Yeah.
Great. Moving ahead to the fourth question, this is more centered around mindfulness and how do you keep yourself sane in a busy schedule of running a startup. So after a long day of work, how do you like to de-stress yourself? Do you have like a mindfulness practice which you do every day? How do you keep calm in chaos is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I think there's like a specific part of that question that is key, and the part of the question says after a long day of work. What's key for me is that concept doesn't really exist in my world. I don't do anything after. I try and blend in things throughout a day. I happen to work most of the day, but for instance, I play tennis, and that's like my my way of getting my mind focused on something that is not specific to work, because once you're on court, it's very hard to think about anything else. But yeah, I don't necessarily do that after work. Sometimes it's during the day, sometimes it's early in the day, sometimes late in the day, and that's generally how I really like to do things, which is I don't really like the stop-start nature that the world seems to suggest is appropriate. I also don't like suddenly taking a 1 week holiday and say, okay, now I'm offline, and then go offline and then come back online after a week. I don't really like that. I quite like to blend it. Maybe we'll go somewhere nice for like a day, or we go somewhere nice for a month and we're working from there, but because it's a change of scenery, you're actually ending up being much more chilled, or whatever. I quite like that like blend of doing everything that's important in life in one go instead of like stopping. And so yeah, I would say tennis is one of the things that I do where it's like very solitary for me and I'm in my own head, but it's not necessarily okay, now I've finished working, let's wind down. Oftentimes I'll play during the day and I'll come back and I'm back to work, or whatever. I quite like blending it that way.
Nice, nice. Yeah, makes a lot of sense because work never stops for an entrepreneur. So you have to find those moments in between your work to really go out and then come back again. And so
Yeah,
you don't have like a fixed schedule, like you're going there 6 a.m. every day
yeah.
or 6
I
p.m. every day, but any slot between your work day, which
But
is
it's not that work never stops. Like life never stops. Like I don't know, if someone important, if my mum sends me a text message or like calls
Mhm.
me, if I'm in a position to answer it, I'm not going to think, oh well, I'm working now, I'm not going to answer the phone. Like obviously,
Yeah,
this is an important person who is part of my life, and if I'm in a position to answer the call, I will answer the call. I'm not going to think, no, I'm offline right now from personal life because I'm working. And that work is the same for me. If I'm in a position to be available, then I will be. If I'm not, I won't be. Doesn't really matter if I'm whatever it's during the working hours or it's like 4 a.m. Same with tennis. Sometimes, it's really nice to play after lunch period sometimes because the weather's a bit nicer.
yeah.
And if others are available, we'll do that. So
Awesome, awesome. Great. The fifth question is, we were talking about this before the podcast as well, remote only or hybrid teams?
I think it depends, but for us, hybrid works really well.
Okay, awesome. Um, Sixth question, pretty interesting. If you get a chance to move to a different city than London, which city will it be and why? I think you have spent like you're based in London currently and you've spent a lot of years here, but any other city which comes to your mind where you could potentially relocate to move Metaview's headquarters there, or stuff like that?
Yeah, I think I have really like cop out answers for most of your questions, but let's see. The London's great. Obviously, I'm now used to it. I've lived here 15, 16 years. And it's a phenomenal city. I've lived in Tehran for almost another 15 years as well. I was born and raised there. Um, Again, interesting city. Um, I recently spent a month in Amman in Jordan, which
Okay.
what exceeded my expectations. So it's like, it's a lovely place, lovely people, lovely environment. Um, that's another good spot. But I think I think the thing that matters most, especially as it pertains to MetaView, is that the world is very small.
Mhm.
So it's very easy to be in another location in the world in, ultimately just a few hours. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But as a individual human, I quite like Santa Barbara as a location,
Okay.
because it's like nice environment and that suits me and my partner's personalities, but also it's like close enough to important hubs.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite like Santa Barbara. But again, the world is so small that we can be anywhere within hours and stay there for as long as we need to. So.
Yep. Great. That's an interesting outlook. Um, the last one is around mentorship, uh, or like generally three startups, entrepreneurs, products, or mentors that you most admire, like currently,
Mm,
something that really excites you at this phase.
yeah. So let's see. The I have huge admiration for an individual called Will Larson. He's the author of some very useful books, CTO at Calm, and he's worked at Stripe and Uber and Dig and a bunch of companies like that.
Mhm.
Um, and my admiration is largely because Will's like an exceptional systems thinker, and therefore structures like the ontology of a problem in such a way that is like very digestible and largely like sound. so it generally feels correct, or it's very hard to look at something a way he's like thought of a problem or a system and think that's incorrect, because they generally feel very sound. And so it results in his advice is always like very good in my opinion, and very pragmatic and very applicable and things like that. So Will Larson would be a person, let's say, that I like get a lot of value from. A startup that I admire a lot is Hex, which is think of it as like a collaborative, essentially a collaborative notebook. Really, if notebooks like data science notebooks were invented in 2022, how would they be? Well, they'll be like the way Hex designed them. They are friends of us from the Palantir time, and the thing that I admire most about them is not necessarily it's not necessarily like the execution of the product or the what I admire about them is their velocity. They have a phenomenal team with very high velocity, and I think that is the most important thing at like any company, but of course an early stage company, where they have this ability to ship just so rapidly, and therefore learn so rapidly. So really like what they're doing there. And I would say I'm also a big fan. So we said two things: Will Larson as a person, Hex the product as a as a method of working. They're like high velocity team, and then I can think of a product as well, Linear, as a product I admire. Not necessarily because of the exact details of the product or the outcome that the product seeks to achieve. I don't particularly care about that, but I think they do a great job at reminding me how important like craft is, and just help me remember that I as a person get energized by caring about my craft. And Linear is like a really good example of folks that care about the craft, and I think I find a lot of energy into that from that.
Great, great. Pretty interesting. All the three mentions are pretty interesting and pretty unique, which I'll personally also follow as well. That's great. Now, this brings us to almost the end of the conversation. I had reserved this last question to talk like a bit about something which I was personally curious about while doing this research, and then if you can share a couple of minutes on the future vision of Metaview as well. So this question is something like this: like, are you like currently Metaview's focus is mostly on the B2B segment. Are there any plans or ideas to open this intelligence up to the candidate side of things as well? So helping interviewees to get better based on their skills that they have. Probably they can utilize this data set to correct their mistakes, improve fluency, confidence, and stuff like that. So I think with the data that you're capturing and the intelligence you're putting onto it, there's a whole value you can unlock towards the interview part of it. Do you think about this? Is there on the roadmap of the future?
And just to clarify the question, is it helping candidates essentially? Is that what?
Yeah.
I think that is not on the roadmap for the foreseeable future. And really it's a question of, and foreseeable future for a company of our size, it's not like 20 years, right? It's like a fairly short period of time. And that's really a function of focus, where there is still a lot left for us to do in ensuring enterprise, and like an enterprise is making people decisions based on truth. And whilst it's very tempting and like very exciting to see how we can apply essentially the same underlying platform to help another constituent of this problem, this problem space, which are candidates, I think it would lack focus if we did that for us. And so we are going to like remain focused on helping companies get really good at doing this thing. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean, I think we have certain ideas that I don't want to dig into too much just because I think they're secrets essentially. But I think there are ways in which candidates can play a part in making organizations become really good at making people decisions. So there are certain ways you can involve candidates in ensuring their voice matters, essentially. But that is not necessarily in the form of us going to candidates and applying the same intelligence and helping them get better. And it's almost the opposite. It's about how can the candidate contribute to this organization getting better. I think that's certainly on our roadmap, and it's something that we think a lot about. But just purely helping, applying the same intelligence to help candidates get better at interviewing and things like that is something that we're excited about the idea of, but we have to refrain from thinking about it too much, because otherwise we'll be spread too thin.
Yeah, that's good. Great. Awesome. Just before closing, if we have touched upon this at various stages in this conversation, but if you can just encapsulate what's the future vision that you and your co-founder said hold for Metaview in the months and years to come.
Yeah, so it really just starts and ends with our mission, which is to power people decisions with the truth. That means we want to make people decisions just as data informed as other key business decisions. People decisions are the most important business decisions. So there's some catch up that needs to be done so that they're data informed. And that we think is fundamentally a data problem because there's a host of data available in the enterprise that is not being captured or combined in a way that could be insightful to a person needing to make a human judgment. And we want Metaview to be the platform where you go to get the perfect picture of your people environment. And that's really, frankly, it. It is a very hard problem to solve. Data problems are gnarly because it's not just about mixing the right data together, but it's about making sure they're in the right shape at all times and things like that. But ultimately, that's Metaview will be the platform where people decisions are made because it's going to be the place where you can get the most insights. Not, again, an emphasis on not just raw data, but combining that raw data to form intelligence in the way that we are actually doing it today for interviewing. Soon we will be doing it for any people decision that you make in an organization. And in our world, we don't know what soon means. Maybe it's months, maybe it's years, maybe it's decades. Don't really mind when it is. We're just going to work towards it.
Awesome. That brings us to the end of the conversation. It was really nice talking to you, Shahriar. Thank you for sacrificing your Sunday morning, afternoon for this. Really appreciate you to spend actually allocating time to that. You could be doing 100 different things on your Sunday, but thanks so much for that. And I really wish you all the best for your and Metaview's vision of the future. I think you guys are solving a really important problem, and I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you so much. Certainly not a sacrifice. Yeah, really pleased to be here, and thanks for having me. And yeah, hope to speak soon.
All right, great.